Recently, I've talked to people who really care about others in this world, and they become terribly distraught when they find that most people don't really care about other people. And it's a hard thing for those who do care to find out and really get it through their heads that that's the world they live in. Most people are egocentric. They do that which pleases them. They avoid pain. That can also be helped along through psychological techniques. And sure enough, Bertrand Russell and other ones mentioned that they would create an egocentric society. That was all part of what the New Age was created to be, to avoid things which make you feel unpleasant. I don't want to hear that. Don't tell me that. It's upsetting. Look on the bright side. Don't be a downer. You know, when there's a forest fire, the animals run for it. When sheep get spooked, they bolt in all directions. And there's supposedly the most domesticated animal alongside the dairy cow. And dairy cows themselves, if they've been chosen to go off to slaughter, seem to know it's coming. They have a awareness, almost a psychic awareness of something happening. And I've seen a neighbor who had cattle. His cattle would be lowing all night long before the truck would come in the morning. All night long, most sorrowful sound you'd ever hear. They just seem to know. Yet mankind, humankind, overtakes them in its domesticity. We've had more work done on us through psychological methods and inoculations to lobotomize specific parts of the brain, like Kostler said in The Ghost in the Machine. And you can see it all around you. You see those who don't want to know any bad news. It's a downer. I want to be happy. I, me, I. And yet the survival of humankind in all ages is dependent on the caring of each individual for the others. Otherwise you have chaos, and such a people will vanish. It's a very telling point, actually, because civilizations have gone in the past, gone down because of that very problem. The elite think they have it all in hand. They care about each other. They know the necessity of caring for each other, at least making sure that they're all in their same positions and standing by each other. They close ranks and stand by each other. But those people down below are running around chasing gurus, New Age, reptilian people, everything you can imagine, anything which excites and titillates the imagination, but they don't want to hear the bad news. And they don't want to know that there are people amongst them who work in projects which would be given the Iron Cross for Joseph Mengele's research. And they could be living next door to you even. There's a lot of very nasty, evil people, and I've talked to some of them. I've heard people tell me, I've met some of them who work for the big boys. One was a woman who was a teacher, a strange kind of teacher, because from a very old family, very wealthy old upper family, who could take 6 months off in the year and go off to China, and obviously paid to do so, and of other countries. And I was talking to her when she came back. And because I understand so many topics, I got chatting to her, and she knew me. standing outside a general store in the middle of nowhere, and she was rather carried away about the Chinese system. See, the Chinese system is to be the model system for the world. There is mandatory abortion for second child families. And she was carried away about their techniques for manipulating society into all being one, like one giant anthill, all going in the same direction with the same one mindset. How they've managed very successfully to sort of downplay individualism and make them all feel part of this great oneness. And that's why it's the model state for the world, according to the United Nations. But she was carried away, and she said, she says they do so well with their population problem. And I played along and said, oh, really? She says, oh, yes, they have it all done so well. And it's true, because in the early days of communism in China, when the word filtered back through the spies in society to the top, they'd send out troops to pick up people in their homes and drag the women off to the clinics for the abortion. And now, with the psychological technique of approval, social approval and social disapproval, they don't have to do that anymore, because their neighbors themselves will force the woman and escort her to the abortion clinic. See, most people really are not individuals at all. They're composites of their brainwashings. It's like someone who notices your car, that someone you know very well, and you say, well, my emergency brake isn't attached. And they'll look at you like, oh, that's illegal. Really concerned, because to them illegal means something nasty, nasty, nasty. And law is just law. It's a bunch of commands put out by people at the top. And laws can be anything. But some people who are composites and who don't think for themselves can be and are your worst enemies in any society. People you might have known for years even, but you watch their Pavlovian responses, and that's what it is. It's Pavlovian responses you're seeing of their indoctrinations. And this woman who was telling me about this, about China, prattled on and glorified their techniques for getting the whole society in on the thing to go against second pregnancies. Social disapproval. So it's not a legal thing anymore, just legal. It's also social disapproval. They used that here with cigarette smoking. Big test decided to indoctrinate children at school so that if you blew smoke 20 feet away, they go into a coughing fit, a paroxysm of coughing, and point at you like, oh, like one of these creatures from a horror movie. A Pavlovian response. And that's what they've decided to do in society, is just use the same psychological techniques of repetition until we all have these various types of Pavlovian responses. And when I said to this woman, but what gives you the right to decide who live and die? And she said to me, because then she suddenly remembered who she was talking to. I wasn't one of her cohorts. And she said, well, somebody has to do it. That was the simple response. Now, I've heard that same response on similar topics from other people who are in the working army, the Earth Army, as they sometimes call it, at the UN. That's their answer. Somebody has to do it. It all makes perfect sense to them. This is similar to a guy I bumped into in my travels who was a big arms dealer. Very pleasant man. Very pleasant. And you'll find that with most of them. They seem gracious, in fact, in company. Concerned about, do you have enough coffee, like something to drink, yada, yada, yada. They'll pull out the chairs for the ladies to sit on, and very courteous. And they will have genuine cares and concerns about people or their own families and so on. But one night I was sitting chatting, and I said, you know, all of these things you're making, these armaments and all the bullets and so on, are going to end up killing people. They might even be used back in Canadians one day. And he said to me, he says, I don't care. He said, I sell to whoever needs them. He said, whoever wants them. I just want to be rich. And he said it, not in a facetious way. He was being very honest about it. I could tell by the way he said it. We have these odd people who are able to profit from wars, rationalize it quite easily to themselves, even though it sounds absurd to people like me. And they have no problem even there's no stammering, there's no hesitancy in their answers. They're telling you generally how they feel. And you find it's incomprehensible how a person can care so much about family, other friends and so on, but have that kind of attitude towards what is chosen to do. These people really do exist. And this is a telling period for humanity because there's a separation taking place. This separation has been talked about in previous ages, as it's called, where society gets to such a stage of corruption from the top to the bottom that something happens, either man-made or whatever, and most folk are wiped out. Others have taken some sort of moral stance concerning this story. There's a change in certain humans themselves. There are certain humans alive who are different from the rest. And these ones come through. Whereas those who are still base do not. Now the elite believe that they are the superior ones and that they will come through. And yet they are the most evil creatures on the planet. People worship very old noble families who got their wealth and their power by slaughtering everyone else around them, generally because they had a big family, going on from there, getting in cahoots with bankers who always go together with these people for armaments and so on, and going off and slaughtering other peoples and dominating them. And today we accept that their descendants simply because it's tradition. If it's true that society likes a winner and loves a winner, then society is doomed if that's the kind of winner they truly like. Anyone who wins by any means possible. We're witnessing the end of humanity as we know it. Now, all the old holy books in other countries have this fable story in it, whatever it is. Even Judaism has it in it, that we go through these cycles, Talmudic Judaism, and that we reach a point of total debasement, and then catastrophe comes, and people are wiped away. And I have to admit, I've seen the good and the bad in my life in extremes. I've seen the many in between, but I certainly have seen extremes. But yet today there are very few people who truly care what's going on. And don't be misled by groups and NGOs, non-governmental organizations who are authorized by the big boys, who are always spouting for more things for the workers or for this or that or the other. This is all part of the agenda. I'm talking about people who really care, not because they're paid to, and because they say all the right things and have an ulterior agenda. But today, we're seeing the dividing line of those who care and the majority who do not. That point is past, in fact. It's already decided. And most do not care. By caring, I don't mean that you hear about something and it's maybe on your mind that night, then it's gone the next day. Caring is something that stays with you. Caring is something that once you realize what's happening somewhere to someone else, you can't just let it go. Regardless of the company you're in or the situation that happens, or you go to a party and everybody's laughing, it still stays with you. Those few people are very rare. They're rare people. And yet those are the ones who are bringing survival instincts into the next stage. The rest of them are gone, because if you don't care about others, you are allowing humanity to be extinguished. Part of survival mechanisms is based, even in the smallest tribe or the largest tribe, is based on caring for others. When you don't have it, you're doomed, because anything can and will be done to you. Growing up in Britain, during a time of mass upheaval, when the deindustrialization after World War II was continuing right down through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and all we had on television at news time was decrees by ministries of this and ministries of that from the government, pushing all of these decrees, and all the bad news of layoffs and plant closures, and the reasons were never given. And it wasn't until the European Union, the big secret unification, was over and done with, and they declassified their documents, they admitted they'd agreed in 1945 to deindustrialize Britain. Like old Rockefeller said, well, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Saw those generations who grew up in misery and uncertainty in the era when Margaret Thatcher came on television and said, there's a generation growing up now who will never see work in their lifetime. Get used to it. That was all part of it. That was the omelette, you see. That was the eggs getting broken. Yeah. Just unfortunate, but it has to be, because that's the plan, you see. And generations are included in the plan. And generations of misery and no hope and no future. That's the reality of those who rule and run and guide this world. These are the same people who make sure that the funding for research into science goes into specific areas which they will control, for leading to total control of the individual. That's the sad truth of this world in which we live. The upheavals are coming even faster because they knew they could not integrate the world into a global system and have just a perfect peace unless they gave it another couple of 100 years of increased immigration from all sides to wherever they wanted to go. And they don't have that time because they go by a very, very strict timetable. It's not astrological. They used astrological symbols for the exoteric to fall into, but it's actually a time clock. They count their ages in time written in the sky. It's a perfect clock. the stellar clock. And they must stay on time. This world is run as a long-range business plan. Long-range business plan, intergenerationally. And when I was young, I went into the libraries, the adult libraries, because I wanted to know about all these old buildings that I could see around the next town, old town. I wanted to know how generations of stonemasons could work on one church, for instance, or a cathedral. More so, I wanted to know is, because I understood there was so much chaos and wars going on and poverty and so on, how come the control or the controlling factor behind all of that for maybe 5, 6, 7 generations never lost control through all the mayhem and chaos and wars? You'd think, well, we'll put that on hold till this is over, but nothing was ever done like that. The money kept coming to the certain building projects. Then you go back into the times of the Norman invasion, the ones who have never really been explained in history. What they have given us is partly a sideshow, quite a bit of untruth, but they've never gone into the nitty-gritty of a people who were financed on a larger scale in World War II, with munitions and supplies and postmaster generals and all this kind of stuff, over a multi-year war to take over the whole of Europe and Scandinavia. And we're told they came from the northern countries. They called their place Normandy. But I don't think that's true at all. They spoke French. They said, well, that's because they moved into France. But no, they spoke French and didn't stay to any mother tongue. And even when they took over the court of England, people forget that for about 200 years, the court of England all spoke French. But who were these Normans who came in with their big building projects? Something that had been lost, because the big building projects throughout Europe came first with the Romans until they left, when their empire appeared to crumble. But they did the same thing. They came in with the money men, the bankers. They forced money on the people. Then they taxed it back, and they paid you to work for them, and then taxed it back from you. Money taxation is important to their system. And from the taxes, they have their big ongoing building projects, the master builders. Huge roads, huge buildings, and a money system to go with this new way of living, which didn't exist before. Well, the Normans reintroduced that, did exactly the same thing with all their big building projects and their creation of capital cities. Ongoing master builders. And democracy is based on this. Same ongoing thing, from local townships right up to the top, to the federal level, international levels now. We have this massive taxation and panels meeting to always decide what to build next. And as they build and build and build, you're taxed more and more and more. Money is a tool used by the elite. It's a means. It's not the end itself. They could use anything they wished. They would wish we'd all just work for nothing. This way we can earn all our numbers, pay all our numbers back out, pay so many numbers back to them, and when you figure it out, you almost are working for nothing. So it's a con game, you see. It's a trick. But because we use this money, then we are paid and we will work for them, and we build these big projects. We build the war machines. We pay universities to put up subsidies to match the subsidies from the foundations to research into specific areas, which will end up giving us more manacles to wear. We build our own chains. We always build our own chains in this system. Then we wonder My goodness, how did that happen? How did that happen? Well, who do you think paid for all these monitors they're putting up? They put up all over Britain, for instance, and all over Europe, and they're putting up all over here. The taxpayers paid for them. The arms of government wanted them, but the taxpayers paid for them. They have microphones in many of them, boom microphones, which can pick up conversations 200 yards away in a shop doorway. And once again, the public are told, this is normal now, you're being watched. You have special people watching you. They won't rat and blackmail you or whatever. No, they're special people that come out of different wombs than you and I, just like police and military people and politicians. And yet we live in the most corrupt age ever. So the ones at the top are more corrupt than anyone else. And you want to trust that. Well, good luck to you. When social Darwinism began to be taught, which really was just survival of the fittest, the elite were so happy to hear it voiced for the first time, something which they'd always believed in anyway, in their own inner religion. And this is something which they had to teach the people to believe in, because once you accept that life is just blobs of protoplasm with sparking synapses and electrochemical impulses racing through nervous systems, then you dehumanize, you take away any sacredness within life itself. And they have been at that so steadily for such a long time now, they've convinced most of the population that that is so. And when you convince the population that, well, life is just an accident almost, but there's nothing great or mysterious about it. See, the scientists can dissect it and explain it all to you. And there's so much of it around anyway, it's not as if it's in scarce supply. Therefore, why bother grieving over those who are dying or sick or going to be killed in this war or the next war or the many wars to come, the ongoing world war, which is on now, which is the war on terror. At one time, people fought to preserve the sacredness within humanity. They fought for that right. Today, it's out the window. It's in the trash bin. Most people don't care for anything outside of themselves. They're walking or racing composites, dashing to and fro to buy the next reward to please themselves at the end of the month. Anything they do for others is done for a reward. Nothing is given without expecting a reward. And it's a sad, sad comment that we've been reduced to this, but it was written about that this would happen. They did have to bring us to this point so they could get the next step, the next stage underway. And of course, they've been teaching this stuff in schools so long now that generations have grown up thinking, well, that's it, it's Darwinian socialism. It makes perfect sense to me. It's survival of the fittest. The most aggressive, intelligent have the right to dominate the rest and do as they will with the peasantry. And that's what we're watching. And yet they have these legalities they must go through of publishing things like yesterday, the blurb I read yesterday. They publish it. That's a legality, you see, because we acquiesce to, under common law, we acquiesce by our silence to their outlandish dictates. And their own historians can then go ahead and write, well, society went through this phase, there was no objection from the public. And that's how things are written. The public feel that they're powerless unless they belong to a non-governmental organization. But that's not true. The amount of people an individual can influence in their lives can be astonishing. And even if you influence 5 people in your lifetime, like the ancient Greek philosophers said, you'd accomplished wonders. And I mean to influence, to change. Something which made such an impact to change people for the better, without robbing them of their self. You'll find out there, in the chaos that's been created and well funded into existence to trap those who are looking for truth. The minefield, as I call it, you get out the tunnel, you see the field, the forest is on the other side of the field, you want to run towards it, but then you find out there's mines buried everywhere across that field. The field is so enticing, because in that field you'll hear and see things you've never seen before. You get information you've never heard before, but it's always spun off in a direction to disable you from becoming much more than you already are, to bring you back into the loop. Before the elite make a single move in any direction, they plan all possible repercussions, like a chess game. And they set up and train people to become the leaders of groups that will arise to combat, or it seems to combat, the initial stimuli. Before anything is done, before the first move is made, they go over this meticulously. But what they cannot count on is the occasional individual here or there who doesn't fall into a category. Those who are unpredictable. When we forget the sacredness within humanity, you've just given away the only thing that could stop them from touching you, and have convinced whole populations that we're just walking little, as I said before, pieces of protoplasm who can be dissected, who can be harvested before you even are clinically dead. And they're pushing further all the time because the fresh organs straight out the body are the best to say. And the ghouls go to work. And we accept it because it's for a good cause, like all charity work. Same thing, same old Masonic thing down through the ages. It's for a good cause. But we look at the horror that's caused in this good cause and where it's going. And people should really ponder deeply and carefully. Next week I'll go into other topics, of course. With maybe some good news here and there, hopefully. And if I wanted, I could target the big audiences by telling them nice things, which make them go to bed feeling fuzzy and warm and happy. But I've never ever pretended that was here to grab the bulk of the populace. I've always looked for the uncommon man or woman, because those are the only ones that truly count. The rest are composites of their conditioning, of their training. And yes, and somewhere deep within them, there's also the fact that they prefer to make certain choices. So forgive this talk tonight as a bit slow. I'm tired tonight. Ponder these things carefully, and may your God go with you. All the best. Good night.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm, there's a golden sky.